One backward glance. Michael O'Donnell, classmate, musician, poet, war hero. Mike O'Donnell came to Shorewood High School from Palatine, Illinois in 1960. In high school, he ran cross country, he wrestled, he was in the art club and the choir, and was a well-liked fellow classmate. Mike entered Whitewater State College in the fall of 1963, where he met fellow musician Marcus Sullivan. The two formed a folk singing duo which performed on campus and in Chicago's Old Town. College became secondary to his music, and Mike left Whitewater, losing his student deferment as a result. The Vietnam War was escalating rapidly. In 1966, more than 380,000 men had been drafted, and Mike knew that by leaving school he would lose his student deferment. He decided to enlist in the Army, become an officer, and fly helicopters, hoping that by the time the extensive training was through, the war might be over. He enlisted because he knew they were going to get him, Mike's sister Patsy said. When the reality of military service hit Mike, he wrote a poem. It was so easy to be a soldier in that springtime, and in this springtime I am a soldier again, and the battles are real. Mike graduated from Army Helicopter School at Fort Walters, Texas in June of 1968 and went to Fort Rucker, Alabama for further training. There he reconnected with his high school classmate Jane Hogue, a college student in Florida, and they got engaged. Jane said, "I asked him not to risk his life unnecessarily or to be a hero. Most frequently, I asked him to come back to me." The day before he was leaving for Vietnam, he wrote this poem for his fiancée. "Tomorrow I'll be leaving. Tonight I spent some time walking. I was going to think about all the things I was going to miss, but I tried not to think about you. I wanted to put some things in glass jars and tighten the lids for the trip. I would open them as I needed to, Geritol for the soul. I didn't want to think about you. I kicked up the stones along the alleyway behind the house and tapped a stick I found to no familiar rhyme. I was not going to think about you. You were all I thought about." Mike's first stop in country was Ben Hoa. Ben Hoa has only been a spot on a map until now, a place to come to when you finally have to come. Ben Hoa is more than 10,000 miles from a city in Wisconsin by the lake. They have nothing in common except one is where I wish to be, and one is where I am. Mike's poetry became well known to his fellow soldiers and remains to this day important to Vietnam War veterans. Jim Lake, a fellow pilot, said, "In the midst of a pretty grim experience in the middle of nowhere where no one cared about us or what we were doing, Mike's poems meant a lot to us. He was telling our story." Mike began flying missions every day, many of them flying dead and wounded men from the front lines. His poetry became darker as the missions increased. On October 25th of 1969, he wrote, "Each of us is a can of tomato paste, and though we may all not have the same label, as we spin through the air when we land too hard or get torn from the outside or within, we spill out and stain the hands of everyone who knew us." Somewhere in here, a kid named Davis died with 3 other souls. You could hardly say I knew him. We passed in and out of each other's days without paying much attention. Today he is dead on the side of a mountain east of me, and all he's left me is his void. I found it sticking to my ceiling and the screens in the windows of my room. Heaven knows I'm not so proud of everything I've done. I mean, I've let some people down, and heaven knows there's so many things left I've got to do. God knows I'm not so sure of him these days. He also knows why people are bleeding to death in the back of my helicopter, and he understands how we can wash the floor clean and just one day later forget he knows anything at all. Mike wrote his most famous poem at his writing desk on January 1st, 1970, and sent it to his friend Marcus. he would be dead within 3 months. If you are able, save a place for them inside of you, and save one backwards glance when you are leaving, for the places they can no longer go. Be not ashamed to say you love them, though you may or may not have always. Take what they have left and what they have taught you with their dying, and keep it with your own. And in that time when men decide and feel safe to call the war insane, take one moment to embrace those gentle souls you left behind. Mike's last poem was written on March 18, 1970, 6 days before his death. I have tasted the air in the early morning, before the sun and before the day. I have let it run down my face and stain my clothes, and I have learned to wash myself with the part of the day that remains. I am dying in the sun at Dak-To. I am each day becoming less interested in the way the morning tastes, and I am dying in the sun at Dak-To. And I am dying in the sun at Dak-To. In late January of 1970, Mike's unit, the 170th Assault Helicopter Company, known as the Bikinis because of their exposure to the enemy, was ordered to Kam Tun, a remote outpost near the Cambodian border. They were tasked with inserting and extracting troops on secret missions in Laos and Cambodia, which the Johnson and Nixon administrations had kept from the American people. In anticipation of a planned secret invasion of Cambodia, part of President Nixon's Peace with Honor plan, a reconnaissance team codenamed Pennsylvania was inserted into a mountainous region in the Ratanakiri province in Cambodia on March 21, 1970. The mission was compromised from the moment they landed, and the team, consisting of 3 Americans and 5 Montagnard tribesmen, came under immediate fire from a superior enemy force. On March 24, 1970, RT Pennsylvania, having been pursued relentlessly for 3 days by a superior enemy force, was exhausted and in imminent danger of being captured or killed, and called for an emergency extraction. At one point during the mission, Mike's helicopter was the only one on station. The leader of RT Pennsylvania saw Mike's helicopter and begged him to make an immediate extraction. Although his fellow pilots radioed that they were only minutes away and that he should wait for them, Mike concluded that the team did not have a few minutes. He landed his helicopter at an improvised landing zone, picked up the team, and began to ascend out of the valley. "I've got all 8, he radioed. "I'm coming out." As Mike flew his helicopter out of the valley, it was suddenly struck by an enemy rocket and exploded. His fellow pilots, now on station, watched in stunned disbelief as the helicopter crashed into the valley 200 feet below. They stayed on station long enough to conclude that no one could have survived, then returned to base. Of Mike's actions that day, a fellow pilot said, "It was the most heroic act I have ever seen." The Army notified Mike's parents, sisters, and fiancé that he was missing in action, a status that didn't change during his parents' lifetime. They died, never certain of their son's fate. In March of 1997, 27 years almost to the date of Mike's death, the crash site was found and excavation began. It would take more than a year before a positive identification was made of Mike and the others in his helicopter. Mike was posthumously promoted to major and awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart, and he was nominated for the Congressional Medal of Honor. Mike and his crew and members of RT Pennsylvania are buried in Arlington National Cemetery and are listed on the Vietnam War wall. The Shorewood High School class of 1963 is raising funds for a scholarship in Mike's name to honor his bravery, his life, and his poetic abilities. We anticipate it will be awarded annually to a Shorewood High School student who has shown an interest in poetry, music, literature, and the arts, all of which were dear to Mike. There are two ways to contribute. First, a check payable to Michael O'Donnell Memorial Scholarship Fund, 612 North 70th Street, Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, 53213, or through the GoFundMe site at https://gofund.me/96150E51. Thank you for considering a donation to honor Michael O'Donnell's service, and thank you for viewing this slideshow.